All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Why Read episode 22. And I have two wonderful guests with me, Bookish Chaz and Derry's Read It Before. And I'm always trying to be very thoughtful of the type of people I pair together on Why Read. And I thought, who better to pair these two with? Because they're both such positive people. They immediately come to mind when I think of just some people who are very positive and encouraging, just warm presences on BookTube. And I'm
Oh,
just going to go ahead and go right into the question of why read? And so this question is less again of an origin, like why you started reading, though you can go that direction if you want to. It's more right now in our day and age where it's so busy, so fast paced, and there's so many things that are pulling at our attention. What makes you decide to pick up a book rather than any other activity like watch Netflix or maybe I don't know, play a video game. So we'll go ahead and start with Chaz. So, hello, Chaz, and why read?
Hello, Joanna. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, for me, number one, the busyness of my life and the craziness of the world makes me want to escape into a world that is not my own, or escape into someone's life that is not my own. And and I love finding out what makes people tick and characters tick and things like that. And I find that I can do that the best way through a book, even though television and movies are good for that too. But I don't get as deeply involved in those characters as I do with characters in books. And also, books can go with me wherever. So, if I've got a minute sitting at the grocery store or whatever, I can open my book and start reading. And so it's the easiest and most convenient way to experience other people.
Oh,
absolutely.
interesting. What an interesting answer to the question. So, are you someone who feels like when you're reading a book that the fictional characters almost become friends to you? Like,
Yes, yes, absolutely. I really do personally believe that they are my people. And I'm often found tearing up and crying when I'm reading a something either traumatic or really happy or something like that happening to a character. Um, yeah, I relate to fictional characters so deeply.
wow. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, I
fantastic.
relate to people in real life too, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Right, but there's something like you said about the being in a different world, kind of being able to leave this world, be in a different environment, that there's something special about connecting to characters maybe in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives me a different perspective that I might not get in my own life. I live in a fairly middle class, uh, you know, uh, very white world at times, and this allows you to get different perspectives of people from different cultures and nationalities and uh, races, even if they're fantasy races, right? You get a lot of different perspectives, and um, I feel like it helps me be a more conscious individual too.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, even in
Mhm.
fiction. Absolutely. Wonderful.
Oh,
Thank you for
a
that answer.
100% agree
Yeah.
with all of everything you just said. Yes, even
Yes.
to the having a book in the grocery store. I'm so glad you said that because I have been known to read my Kindle in the supermarket shopping line.
Same.
So I'm glad I'm not alone in that.
Yeah.
So yeah. So hello
Right.
everybody in the chat. It's lovely to see all of you as well.
Yes. Hello,
Um,
everybody. I
and
have a
thank you
lot of
so
friends
much
here.
for there is. And thank you so much for those kind words, Joanna. It is just lovely to think that that's how people see me. So thank you. Um,
Welcome.
my thing with read, there's so many reasons why I read. I mean, I just getting away from my own world. Obviously, that's part of it. Depending what I'm reading, sometimes it's about catharsis and being able to, as my therapist says, feel your feelings, because anyone who struggles knows it's very hard to allow yourself to take that time to recognize, yes, I'm grieving, yes, I'm happy, yes, I deserve a moment to have a big cry, and I won't do that for myself. But to read somebody going through something similar, I can totally cry for them, totally. And when I get to read about happy things, oh, it's so wonderful. I had to stop reading on the train about a week ago, and it was such a beautiful moment. And it's a moment I knew was coming because it was in another of my Robin Hobb rereads, and I knew the moment was coming. And somehow, I don't know how, somehow I always forget just how beautiful that moment is. Because when it rolled around, I could feel the tears just streaming. I was like, I'm on the train. Okay, I'm going to look out the window for a while. Because I was like, I'm not even sobbing. It's just tears. I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. Because it was just so lovely. And then I read because it's fun. And I get to read about vampires or wizard detectives in Chicago, or warriors in the middle of nowhere having a war with weird serpent people, or it's a workout for my imagination. And just saying, my imagination is better than anything HBO can put out there. Just saying.
Totally.
So it's like peak programming that I can provide pretty much for myself. So it's sometimes it's work if it's something new. I don't know if everyone here knows, but I had a stroke about 10 years ago, and reading new books pretty much became impossible. My brain just won't hold it. It's like reading through a sieve. It just gone the moment I've read it. And so I stopped reading new things for a long time. And I started watching AP over on A Critical Dragon. I love that man so much. And he talks about a lot of different techniques for reading. And I started to try some of those with new material, and it works. And I, for the first time in years, could read new things. But it's really hard work. It's like being a child again, having to learn from the bottom. And so while I read all the time, I've also had to learn how to read again in the last few years. And so it's a balancing act of, okay, I want to read, but I don't want to work hard. So I have to reread. Or I really want to read that new thing. Have I got the energy to do that? So
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work. I'm curious
it can
though,
be.
but it is really inspiring that you are able to enjoy reading still by going back to rereading and promoting that on your channel. Because I think there's a lot we could say in this discussion about rereading. But I also am curious though, because you said that A Critical Dragon, the AP, that he offered some techniques that were very helpful for you. Were there any
Yeah.
specific techniques? Are there any specific techniques that come to mind that you found were helping you?
I think more than anything, the thing I got the most out of was purely because it was the first technique that I heard him discussing, which was close reading. And this idea that I just need to slow down and really focus on the words on the page and really pay attention to which words have been used and what are these specific words trying to evoke, and how long are the sentences, what kind of sentences are they, whose voice are we in, why are we in that voice, and to ask myself these questions. But of course that's like going to school. You actually have to work, you've got to pay attention, you've got to stop your brain going off on a million tangents and really focus on what's in front of you. And while it was really hard work and still is, it's made me appreciate books that I've read. I mean, I've read some books a ridiculous number of times now, but I've always been a rereader. And to be able to get so much more from those books it was a gift. It really was a gift that AP gave me with that, just that insight to actually really look at the words on the page. And just a gift, absolutely a gift.
Wow. That's so inspiring. That's
That
wonderful.
is.
Well, thank you. And I hope that it does help people. Because I mean, I struggled for so long after my stroke. I felt like a piece of me had been cut away, not being able to read new books. I have learned, however, I'm very grateful that I had already read some of A Song of Ice and Fire. I could continue in that world. And I'd already read Realm of the Elderlings, so I could keep in that world. So it was like, oh, thank goodness. Because I think if I'd missed out on all of the greats in fantasy, I think I would have been highly depressed. I mean,
Yeah.
I am anyway, but anyway.
Yeah. And we have AP here in the chat. So
Yay!
glad to hear that those
Yeah,
techniques
there
have
he
been
is.
helpful for you.
Lovely to see you. It's actually
Yeah.
nice having AP in the same time zone as one or more of the guests.
Oh, that's a good point. He's now in the same time zone I'm in, which is amazing.
Yeah,
Very
it's
helpful for the
absolutely
read along
great.
that we're in together.
So,
Wonderful. Yeah. And he also brings up this wonderful point here that
well,
to remember that it is you that did the work, because that is work, to go ahead and to take the
it is.
time with the text. And I'm curious about that. And I'm curious because I'm not going to ask ages here, but I am curious with you two, if you feel like with your generation of readers, do you feel like your approach to reading might be different than those younger than you? Maybe Chaz, I'll start with you. Like, do you feel like your approach to reading and books, do you feel like you take longer amounts of time reading? Maybe I'll preface this and I'll say this. So I've been doing some research on generation theory, and I found out that according to some researchers, though I've talked to some Gen Z people who say this is not the case for them at all, that Gen Z is known for having like 5 screens or 5 tabs open at a single time and going between each one. So they might read a lot, but they read in shorter segments. So they might read for a few minutes, then skip over here and watch a little bit of Netflix, skip over here and message somebody. Now, the Gen Z people I've talked to have said, no, that's not the case. It's more like 3 screens. But still, I mean, it still makes me wonder, about generational reading and how that's, yeah, if your approach to reading, if you feel like that's different.
Yeah, it definitely is different. I grew up reading a lot of books. I took a break in my college years and stuff like that because school books, you know. But I think I think it's definitely different. Like, I didn't have access to smartphones and streaming devices, and I was 13 when the Nintendo Entertainment System first came out. So, I didn't have all of those things early on in my childhood, whereas the modern child has all of those things easily accessible to them and more. So I've definitely noticed a difference in my reading habits versus my kids' reading habits. Although we did raise them as readers very early on, so they love to read as well. But um, being able to sit down and focus on a book as your sole method of entertainment for a certain period of time comes very easy to me and not so much to them. I mean, I'll get distracted, somebody sends me a text message on my phone or something like that. But overall, if I can sit down and read for an hour, 2 hours if I have a good chunk of time for that. And my kids and most of their friends are not that way. It's at least the 3 screen mentality.
That's so fascinating. I was reading in a book too that, especially for teenagers, that can have an impact on what's called neural pruning. So
Mm,
your brain you're born with so many neurons, and over time, in order to make the use of more specific neurons, it goes through a process of pruning. And because when people are looking at so many screens, it's taxing their what's called working memory. It
yeah.
actually affects that process as well. So it can have an effect on development at a certain age too, if you're kind of going between tasks rapidly rather than just spending some time slowing down on one thing at a time, which I think is just not a thing we do anymore in our society. And I'm just curious about that. I'm curious about that, how that affects readers and how that affects, like I said, our different generations of readers here, and which I think is wonderful. A wonderful part about the booktube community is that we do have different generations of readers that are represented, and we could all have discussions on the same books, which is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But
It
yeah,
is.
yeah. What do you think, Derry? Do you feel like it's been different for
I
you in that regard?
absolutely. Like Chaz, I didn't have a game system when I was a kid. I didn't have a cell phone until I was in my 20s. I didn't get a smartphone until I was in my 40s. So the concept of having media at my fingertips is foreign, because the only media I could always have at my fingertips was books. And not having that instant availability to distract myself from this, that, or the other, it sort of makes you able to focus, because that's all there is. And I do feel that not being able to really invest that time in any one particular thing doesn't help young readers. I live with my best friend and her family, and her kids are teenagers, and watching them trying to do anything is, it's like watching people trying to herd cats. It's just like, you were looking for socks. Why are you now in the pantry making a sandwich?
So true.
Wait a minute. You were in the middle of doing that, and does my head in. And it makes me a little bit sad. I'm like, there's no way possible that you're ever going to get the level of payoff for spending that many hours immersed in something, in just letting yourself sink into something and letting it take you somewhere. It's astonishing. And yet, when I talk to some of the younger booktubers I've encountered, I mean, okay, yes, it's a slightly skewed sample that I'm talking about. I mean, they're on booktube for a start. They have such incredible insights to what they're reading. And I'm like, okay, well, clearly they're paying attention. And it's been wonderful to sometimes get an entirely new generation's lens on something that I thought I knew or I understood. And they're able to give me this fresh way of looking at things that offers me more in what as I said, in what I thought I already knew. And that is just marvelous. I love it so much. So, because
Yeah, that
the
is
more I can
impressive.
miss things, yeah,
That is impressive when we can have those kind of conversations and still,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know how that happens. I'm pretty impressed with people who can do that, just read in
yeah.
short segments and be able to process in that way.
And
Um,
clearly people are, and it's wonderful.
yeah, yeah.
One thing that I found interesting too, like you would think that a generation so steeped in different forms of technology and social media and things like that would be more likely to do things like reading books on their phone, like on Kindle audiobooks, and or even just a regular Kindle device. And maybe some are, but like for my kids, I've taught, because I read almost exclusively on Kindle now, and I've tried to talk to my kids about that, and they're like, no, Dad, I prefer physical books. But both of my kids. And so that's an interesting, it's kind of a paradox for me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's a lot easier if you just have, I know a lot of people say this, that if you just have a physical book. I mean, I guess it depends. If you have a Kindle, that's obviously just for reading,
Yeah,
but for some people, if they read on their phones, it's easy to get distracted by other things.
Yeah.
that's right. Because ping, somebody's messaging you, or ping, something's happened in this social media, and you can often be pulled away. But actually, that's
Yeah.
true, Jazz. As you said that, I'm thinking, actually, yeah, the times I have watched the teenagers read, they have read out of physical books. They both have phones, they both have laptops, they both have access to digital media. And yet the teenage girl is currently lugging around Twilight, which is a
Yeah.
pretty hefty book. It's going in her school bag, and I'm not complaining. So,
Yeah.
although I do constantly say, now, this is not what a healthy relationship looks like.
As long as you're aware.
Yeah, just be aware
Just
this
be
is
aware.
not okay. If
Yeah.
a boy actually does this, stay away.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Like this comment here, I'm a zillennial, and I like that
Nice.
term. And I used to read for hours when I was younger. I read in bursts nowadays, so I think it's an era thing. Social media has changed the way we work. It really has. I mean,
Yeah.
I think for all of us, honestly.
Oh, it's
And
changed the way we live. I mean,
it
how
really
many of us
has.
lay in bed for that first few minutes of the day going, okay, roll over, check the phone. What time is it? What's happened overnight? Okay. Never used to do that. You used to lay there for 5 minutes going, is the alarm going to go off again? Am I going to hit snooze, or shall I just get up? that was your
Yeah.
option, basically. Now you could, if you don't have to be anywhere, you could stay in bed for hours scrolling.
It's so true. And it's true too what it said here. I mean, we do have these options now. He says I still read physical books except for Wheel of Time rereads, which I do on audio. Audio can be great for that. Fascination about generations. I'm Gen X and I'm pretty much a geek and love technology. Yet I love losing myself in a book or ebook or audiobook for hours.
That's
Something.
awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's
Actually,
wonderful.
that's another thing I've noticed too is, and I did try this when I first found BookTube, was moving between books. It was never something I'd ever thought of doing, because you picked up a book and you read it till it was finished, and then you picked up the next book, and that's how you read. It had never occurred to me that I could stop at any point in the book I'm reading and pick up something else.
I've never done that.
No.
Well, I have done
And
that,
I
but I don't do
tried
it
it.
very often. Yeah.
I have tried it, and it only works for me if they're all rereads and I just want a particular mood. But if it's a new book, I have to stay in that world. I can't. I just can't, because I'm like, no, if I leave this world now before I've finished building it in my brain, I'm going to lose it.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that's a me thing, or if this is a generational thing, or if it's a social media thing, or if it's just peer pressure on BookTube. I don't know.
I don't know. Well, I don't know if it is, because I remember the concept of reading multiple books at once was I first came across it many years ago. I met a girl who said, I can't read more than one book at once. And she said she always has like 10 books going at a time. So I guess it's been a thing for a while for some people.
Wow.
But I've just never been that. I still try to do that, but I'm not always the most successful at it. I usually just find myself wanting to devote myself to one book at a time, for better or worse.
I have allowed myself to accept when something is boring me now. Whereas in the past, I'd be like, oh, I'm not really enjoying this book, but I need to finish it so I can move on. Now I'm like, actually, I'm not feeling this. I'll put it aside until I am in that mood, or I admit that was a fail.
I wish I could do that. I can't. I still can't give up on books most of the time, unless it's an audiobook. Audiobooks, I do DNF now and then. Even then, I tend to, it is easier for me, because then I could just make the rationale or justification like,
It's the
oh,
narrator.
well, it's a narrator, or I could just pick up the physical book later. That's what it is. And so I do that quite a bit. But with physical books, if I start that journey, I'm almost always going to finish it. Like I just have a hard time quitting. I have the hardest time. And the problem I have is if I do DNF a book, because I used to, when I was younger, I used to DNF all the time. I just totally lose my motivation to go back to that story. So I have that issue right now with one of Chaz's favorite authors. So maybe Chaz, you can give me a good reason for picking up this book again. But American Gods by Neil Gaiman left a long time ago, a very long time ago, many, many years ago. And I've always regretted it. I felt at the time like the book was doing things that were going over my head, because I just wasn't very knowledgeable about Norse mythology. And I felt like it was making a lot of references. There were a lot of allusions that were just going over my head. And I had that sense while I was reading it. And so I got a good chunk into that book, I think. I think I got at least a third into the book before I DNF'd it. And then I don't know. I just haven't felt interested in going back ever since, even though I've heard from so many people how good that book is. I mean, so many people love that book. And it's been very, yeah, it seems like it's been influential on many other books or many other things. And I've liked other books that kind of have a similar, I think, with gods interacting with humans. So, yeah. What do you think about American Gods, Chaz, as a gaming
Yeah,
fan?
good question. And I noticed Matt on Books was saying something about it too, and that's kind of my take. Um, with game, I love Neil Gaiman. You know I do. He's my absolute favorite author, but American Gods is my least favorite of his books. And I made it through, but like Matt says, it is a slog, and at times it is anyway. So I wouldn't blame anybody for saying I'm not going to read that book or I'm not going to go back and read that book. Um, I think I may enjoy it better if I reread it at some point, which I probably will. But yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one because it's much more dense and dry in a lot of places and a little bit confusing too. I'll
Yeah.
definitely give you that. There's some additional short stories in that universe. There's one about Shadow, and that's in Neil's book Trigger Warning, and then he's got another one in, I think it's Fragile Things, which is called The Monarch of the Glen, and that's about Mr. Wednesday. So there's if you read those short stories, it might give you a little bit more impetus to get back to the book. The
I
other
would
option
say
is,
too.
if you
So
don't mind graphic novels, the complete graphic novel series of American Gods is out now. So maybe
give it a
Interesting.
go.
Yeah.
maybe try a different format if you're into that.
Yeah. I
I was just
have
going
been
to
very
say, you've read
successful.
a lot since then. You've probably come a long way as a reader and are more likely to get most of those references. And you've experienced so many more authors doing the meandering road trip thing. And if you're in the right mood to just hang out in America, then it could be a good vibe. Because
Mhm.
I've always looked at it as a vibe book. This is somebody foreign to America going, America is weird. And that's what the book is to my mind.
Yes,
It's just
America is
one of
very
the
weird.
ways, it's a lens to America from the outside.
Mhm.
And I really enjoy American Gods.
Yeah. Yeah. I have been very successful with some of other Gaiman's works, including The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which I absolutely love. I know you love that one too, Chaz.
Mhm.
As far as
My
American
favorite.
Gods, and I was talking about this to Laura from Fantasy Awash because she loves that book. She's also a huge Gaiman fan. That particular book is interesting to me because outside of BookTube, with all of my friends and family who read fantasy, which there aren't that many and they don't read that much fantasy, but of all of my friends who have read fantasy or anything like it, that is their favorite fantasy book. I have met
Wow.
so many friends that adore that book. My uncle considers it one of his favorite books of all time, and he's an
Wow.
extremely well-read person. But
Mm.
he doesn't even read fantasy. But that's actually one of his favorite books. And my brother loved it. My One of my best friends loved it. I just went to coffee with a group of friends here in town, and all of them had read it except me. and I met, and it was just kind of funny
Sorry,
because I was
that's
like,
funny.
yeah, it was funny because I was like, oh,
Oh,
I have a fantasy booktube channel, and this math professor who I just met said that it was his favorite book of
yeah.
all time, and so I've been feeling really strange about not having read it. But you're
I
right,
think,
Derry. It has been a long time. I could feel
yeah.
differently now.
Also, you have to kind of allow yourself to not get all the references and just
Mm,
kind of go, the bits I don't get don't matter. The way he's using these gods are that lens from the outside. So just accept that and just go, okay,
Mhm.
that has a reference to something I don't know, but that's okay. That's an inside joke for the people who know. And I might learn
Yeah.
that one day or I might not. And just let it tell you what it's trying to tell you, which is America is weird. Go with it.
And American Gods is an interesting commentary on this generational conversation too,
yes,
Joanna,
I think you would
because
absolutely
it's
vibe
the
with
old gods competing with the new gods of technology and multimedia and a whole bunch of different things. And, the internet is here. So the internet has created all of these digital gods that are now competing for the attention of Odin and Thor and all the classics. And so it's an interesting look, and it's an older book too. It's not a modern book, but Neil Gaiman just has a way of having his finger on the pulse of not only what's happening but what's coming,
it.
and so reading it feels it doesn't feel dated. It's just kind
No,
of
it
getting
doesn't.
that grip on the book uh, and being willing to push through some of the slower parts. So I would definitely recommend you rereading it. I know I'm going to reread it at some point, and I don't know when that's going to be, but if you want to, we can always buddy read it, Joanna.
Yeah, maybe. I might have to do that. I'm
Yeah,
curious though, and I love this here. You don't have to get
yeah.
everything is a good reading rule generally. Absolutely. I say that a lot with Malazan. Yeah. Well, I just
Yeah.
read a book that
Take
I
your own
feel
advice here, Joanna.
I know. And actually, I mean, it's funny because I just finished today, thanks to Matt on Books, who gifted this to me, Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. And this was
Oh,
actually very influential on Gaiman, apparently. And I would not be surprised if this was directly influential on American Gods, but it's more to do with Buddhism, like the Buddhist god pantheon. And they're not real gods. It's really weird. It's a weird, wild trip of a sci fi book. And it's very funny and clever. And Gaiman even has a quote here: tricky and brilliant and heartfelt and dangerous. So
yeah.
it's
Gaiman is a
pretty,
huge Zelazny fan, so yes, it will have been an influence.
yeah.
So
Have you read this one, Derry?
I haven't. I'm ashamed to say I've never read any Zelazny.
Oh,
I will get there.
yeah. No, it's a wild trip.
Because
It is a
it
wild trip.
he's an influence on a lot of my favorite authors. So clearly there's gems there that have influenced and inspired. So there's clearly value in reading them, and to then also know that the writing itself is good, not just the concepts.
The
I mean,
writing in here is
you've got to go.
brilliant. It is some of the best prose I've read all year. I was just
Nice.
blown away. There was like quote after quote after quote, and it's funny too. Like I was
Nice.
laughing out loud in places, and yet there were some just incredible descriptions that just blew my mind. And
Wonderful.
it's one of those books where like there are only 7 chapters in the book, and I went through each chapter, and after finishing each chapter, I would leaf back through and just suddenly see things in a new way. It's like one of those kind of books where you can look forwards and forwards and backwards again. It's a weird
Nice.
book. It's a really complex book. At the same time, it's something that you can read on different levels and enjoy on different levels. It's something that I think I would have to reread to get more out of though.
Yeah.
But it was so rewarding, even just as a first time reading. Philip, I cannot wait to hear your thoughts on this book. I cannot wait. You're gonna love it. I predict you will love this book. Sorry, just saying.
That sounds amazing.
I
The
haven't
book
read any of the
Fantasy
last one
Awash,
either. I want to read it.
the book Fantasy Awash, in case people are listening and not seeing the book I'm holding up, is Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. Absolutely incredible standalone. It was written in 1967, so Summer of Love. So that's when a lot of the
Nice.
Eastern influences were obviously coming to the West. And
Oh, the
Matt from
Beatles were like, yeah, man, get into it.
Yes,
So,
and
yeah.
Matt from Matt's Fantasy Books, or sorry, Matt on Books. I get their names mixed up. I'm so sorry. Matt on Books did an amazing review of this book, and I highly recommend everybody watch that review. It was very helpful for me when I was reading it because there
Cool.
are some structural timeline things that Zelazny does that I would have been very confused otherwise.
Right.
But it's an excellent review overall. He gives some excellent references to as to like things that were happening in the world and the movie that was almost made, the weird story about the movie that was almost made on this book. So highly recommend Matt's review, but I'm so
Awesome.
grateful that he got me to read this book because it's going to be a top book for me.
Fantastic.
And
It was
that's
so
not one
good.
of the Amber books, correct?
No, Amber,
Yeah.
but it is the same author. It is the same author. He's
Yeah.
probably more, I don't know if he's more well known for his Amber, probably more well known for the
Oh
Amber.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a very famous one. Yeah, but I want to read his Amber Chronicles now. Have you, either of you read the Amber Chronicles?
I've not.
I haven't
But
read Annie's the Zelazny at all.
I
But
just want to say that Paul the bookworm here has just gone as good as Gaiman's work is. The most grateful thing is that without him we wouldn't have had Mort and Discworld. And it's something that I actually make a point of several times on my channel, that anyone who loves Discworld has to thank Neil Gaiman, because it
Really?
would not exist without him. Terry Pratchett had written the first few novels and was about to move away from it because that was a fun little thing that he did, and he wanted to go into his science fiction series. And Neil Gaiman wanted more of Death, the character, specifically, and asked, he's like, I'd really like to see something from that character. And Terry Pratchett apparently was like, oh, I'm done with that series. And then a week or so later, Neil tells the story where the phone rang, he picks it up and goes, hello. And Terry Pratchett goes, you bastard, and hung up. And we got Mort. And from there, obviously, he's gone, actually, there is something here. And that's where we got the Discworld. And Terry Pratchett didn't return then to his science fiction work until, quite close to his end, where he brought in Stephen Baxter to work with him on it. And so, yeah, anyone who loves Discworld has to thank Neil Gaiman.
yeah,
It is
That's
literally down to
amazing.
him it exists.
That's amazing. And I understand Gaiman is, I read Good Omens a couple of times actually.
Yeah,
And that was actually one of the best collaborative books,
I
I would
love that.
imagine,
Yeah.
with two authors, because it does feel like Gaiman. And at the same time, it feels like Pratchett. It's just the perfect combination of
is.
the two. And I don't even think I could pick it apart line by line and say, this is more Gaiman, this is more Pratchett. It just feels like both authors at the same
Yeah.
time. And it's fun.
And there are
Yeah.
lots of funny stories about that both of them spoke about over the years. One of the things that sticks out to my mind, because I love Good Omens, I've read it lots, I'm sure you have as well, Chaz, is that they talk, because this was in the era before the internet, where they would be posting floppy disks of what they'd written to each other, and they'd make changes and suggestions and post stuff back. And there are portions of the book that neither of them remembers writing.
Wow.
They're like, the book wrote itself.
That's amazing. That's
it just
clever.
kind of formed between them. And I love that. I just love that it's created out of nothing portions that neither one remembers coming up with. Magic. Just magic.
I would imagine the whole process of co-writing a book with somebody would be, I should just ask somebody sometime about this. I know that Jenny Wirtz talked about her writing with Raymond E. Feist, and how they would write a chapter, send it off to the other person, and whatever the person changes, they didn't get to have any say in it. They just had this back and forth like that. Something along those lines. I'm sorry, Janny, if I'm butchering your story, because I'm really bad at paraphrasing what people say. But that discussion was over on Tori's channel, Janny and Tori Talk, for Motley Cruise Chats. So it was an interesting process to hear the collaborative way that they work together. But I would imagine it would be really difficult as an author to write something and then send it off to another author. And I don't know, or to receive something from another author. I don't know. I just would find that process probably kind of intimidating personally.
I think what worked for them was they were friends first. Neither of them had come into their own as creators of anything. And it was Good Omens that sort of put both of them in the mainstream. Neil Gaiman was in the process of doing Sandman when Good Omens was being created, and Discworld was just sort of getting its footing with the mainstream press. People started to know what Discworld was, but that collaboration kind of brought those small groups together and went, bang, both of you are now famous. And they never had time to come back to it, but they were friends. They met while they were journalists. And so I imagine, because I'm not an author, and I don't intend to ever be, I imagine sending something that you thought was funny to a friend and having a friend write something back and go, that is really funny. How about we add this? And then it's even more funny. And I wonder if that was why that collaboration worked so well, because it was about, I think this is great. What do you think? Rather than, I'm an author, this is the goal, we're going to do this. It just it brought itself into being, as it were.
It's amazing. Looks like Laura has a lot of thoughts about this too, that Pratchett wanted to buy Good Omens from Gaiman.
Yeah. It was like, it was such a great idea. It was just so good. I want to, are we going to do this or not? Because if it's just us two doing this, it's never going to come to anything. But so if you don't want to do it, then I want to.
Yeah. There was something specifically in Lord of Light that made me think a lot of Good Omens, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, there was something at the in the last chapter. I don't want to give it away though.
No, because if it's there,
but there was something. It probably isn't really that big a spoiler. This book is kind of hard to spoil, but yeah. And she says Gaiman had sent him what he had for Good Omens and was struggling with it. Pratchett never got back to him until a year or more later and said, "If you're not doing anything with it, I want to buy it." They then decided to work on it together, and it is one of the best books ever written.
Yeah,
fascinating. It's my brother's. I have two brothers, and one of my brothers, this is his favorite book. Like I lent him.
I love it.
I read it, lent him my copy, and he read it like 10 times before I got that copy back. And I reread it, but yeah, it's a fantastic book.
I love Good Omens. It's especially great on the new audio production
because they've got
with David Tennant and Michael Sheen reprising their roles. So yeah, they do the latest audiobook version of it. It's amazing.
It is. And Good Omens is one of the few things I have multiple versions of.
Same. Yeah.
I mean, AP here says it's the book he's bought the most copies of. Me too. Because it's the one you buy and then you have to lend to people. And you just know you're not going to get it back. To the point where for some windows, I would have 2 copies, knowing that I would give one away.
Yeah.
Because you have to read this book. I've gifted it to people. It's just so great.
Yeah. I only have a beat up old paperback copy that's ages old that I still have. And I guess it has sentimental value for that reason. But maybe I'll check out a reread via audio at some point.
It's really good. And
it's really great. And
dramatic readings.
I have the illustrated version too.
Yep. There's just some wonderful, wonderful versions of it out there. So.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of perfect to talk with both of you because I know, of course, I always think of Neil Gaiman. When I think of Neil Gaiman, I always think of you, Chaz. And then when I think of Discworld, Derri is always what comes to mind too. Of course, I always think of Robin Hobb with you too, Derri. And and I know
that something else hooks you for me.
Well, those 2 series especially, they come to mind. And actually, speaking of Robin Hobb, so Chaz, how far are you in Live Ship Traders? Have you finished Live Ship Traders yet?
I finished Live Ship Traders just last month, and oh my gosh,
tell us about it.
It's one of my favorite series at this point. A Song of Ice and Fire is still my number 1, but I don't know. Yeah, Live Ship Traders is absolutely amazing, and I struggled with Farseer, so I liked Assassin's Apprentice pretty well. I absolutely adored Royal Assassin, and I really struggled with Assassin's Quest to the point of almost DNFing it, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I switched over to the audiobook, and then I was able to finish it. But then reading Live Ship Traders just opened up whole new windows into this world, like even elaborating on things that happened in Assassin's Quest, and I'm like, okay, I'm here for it. And then there's a particular character that is in Live Ship Traders. I won't spoil anything, but I did a buddy read with this with Danielle over at Bookcara, and after we finished reading it together, she clued me into something that I did not catch about a particular character in the book. And I'm like, okay, so now I have to read Tawny Man. I have to.
You
because
do.
now I need more information on the Fool, and I'm just.
And how that all
But
connects.
Live Ship Traders was the perfect trilogy for me. Like there's nothing about Live Ship Traders that I did not love. Uh, it was just so perfect for me. The character development, the world. I love nautical fantasy, so I was right there. You know, give me some ships, give me some talking ships. I'm there for it.
And that's the thing. That's the thing that puts people off. They're like, oh my God, Thomas the Tank Engine on boats. I can't.
Oh yeah, but
And
it's still not
everybody has
Thomas.
that mindset. And I get it. That's what it, when people say it's talking ships, that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, sure.
When, and now that I'm known as the Hob person, everyone knows. This is what I tell you. These ships are characters. Like they're fully, one of my favorite characters of the entire realm of the Elderlings is a ship.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a woman infamous within the fantasy community as being the person who does characters.
Mm-hmm.
So for a ship to be one that's right up there, you have to consider this is a ship better written than some humans
Mm-hmm.
by other authors.
Oh yeah,
I just,
absolutely. And
oh, and
JR,
it is that.
at least read Royal Assassin Man, because that's the best book in that trilogy. At least read Royal Assassin.
And
I
I
hope you
yeah,
do. And
I have seen,
but you're right,
commented on
Derri.
his
She's
thing.
such a great character writer, and I've often said that that Fitz is a good character when he's with other characters. He's kind of bland by himself, but when he's with other characters, he's great. In Live Ship Traders, though, like all
At
of the
multiple
characters could
POVs.
easily stand on their own and be really interesting and really unique and mysterious, and especially the Rainwilders. Like, oh my
Yeah,
goodness, I'm just I'm
it
just
is.
eating it up. So
I mean, I love the fact that that Jake Bishop, who read them a couple of years ago, he's reread now as well. He talks about Realm of the Elderlings. Within the Realm of the Elderlings, his ranking of the trilogies, the Live Ship Traders isn't his favourite, but as a trilogy, it's his favourite trilogy of all time. And
mhm.
I heartily concede that point because that trilogy within Realm of the Elderlings is the most complete. You could read it as a separate trilogy on its own. You don't need context from the rest of the series.
That's very true.
You do need to read it in order if you're reading all of the series, though. So if you read Live Ships and didn't know anything else existed, you have to go back to the beginning because otherwise it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that trilogy is simply perfect. The story flows beautifully. The pacing in it is great. It tells a complete story in and of itself that is so satisfying and gives you character growth like nothing you've ever read before. And it's hilarious in Discord, Chaz, you've seen it, where people have started the book going, I hate this character. I want to physically abuse that character.
Oh
And by
yeah,
the end
and
of
I
the
know exactly
trilogy,
which character
everyone
they're
is
talking
saying,
about.
oh my God, that character is amazing. And I love them so much. And I am here for them forever. And it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
Literally everybody. Everybody can disagree on who they hate more and why they don't like that and why they don't like this and why they love that and why they love the other. Not a single person disagrees with the fact that that one character starts off completely hateable and you come to love them.
That's amazing.
Everybody has that. It's amazing.
Have you not read Live Ships, Joanna?
I
She's
haven't.
promised me in the new year.
Well, so
I
yeah,
will
my
hold
thing
you
is
to
I
it,
just want to
Joanna.
make sure that I read it. Oh, I know, I know, I know. The thing is, I've been very proud of myself that since actually probably since I started my channel, I've done a much better job at trying to stick to a couple of series at a time
Yeah.
rather than trying to do a million series at a time. I get
Uh-huh.
anxiety when I watch some of my friends' channels and they have 20 series on the plate. And I'm
That's
good for
overwhelming.
them. I know they all could do it, but for
Whew.
me, I think that would just be too much.
Mhm.
I feel like I do my best when I don't spread books out in a series too much. And so I want to make sure that I just give it the right amount of time. I don't want to rush my experience of Hob. I found that even with Farseer, I enjoy I think I just enjoy fantasy like Robin Hobb, like A Song of Ice and Fire when I'm not rushing my experience. And that
Oh,
doesn't
yeah,
mean that I'm enjoying it
absolutely.
any less. I feel like sometimes we attribute our our sense of enjoyment of something with how fast we read it. Oh, I couldn't put the book down. For me,
Oh, I
sometimes that's the case.
heartily approve of taking your time with Hob.
Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
that's the case. Sometimes I'll read a book really fast, and that's the way that I can enjoy it the best. Like, I find Abercrombie works really well, reading at a fairly fast pace. I loved reading Rage of Dragons, for example, at a fast pace so many years ago. Some books I do feel like that is the way I want to enjoy them, and then other books I feel like I just want to live in the world. And usually it comes down to that.
Yeah.
If the author put a lot of thought not only into characters but into world, then that's usually one I want to take my time and just absorb. And so I feel like Hobb is probably that kind of author for me. I did take my time with Farseer, especially with the third book. It took me a long time to read that third book. So I think that's probably going to be my approach when I pick up Live Ship. But who knows? Maybe it'll be a case where I
You
can't
might
put the
zoom
book
through.
down.
You never know.
You never
But
know. Yeah.
I've been known to with equate food books with food, and that sometimes you just want a Big Mac, so you go for that one that's going to give you that instant rush of adrenaline, and you're like, oh, this is really exciting, and you just have to read it from beginning to the end, and it's just great, and that's what you want, and that's brilliant. Other books are like a 5-course dinner made by a Michelin chef, where you want to take your time and appreciate what's been offered to you, and to try and find the nuances that have been put in there, and you're just like, this is an experience that you want to do. Sometimes you're not in the mood for that. I don't have time. It's too fluffy, too fancy. I just want something simple. So it depends on your mood, and
It really does.
it's so I very much am like, when you're in the mood to read Hob, that's when you read Hob.
Yeah.
Don't just read it because, oh, everyone's reading it, so I have to read this now. No, you need to want to read Hob.
Yeah,
And
most definitely.
yeah,
I agree. And the and it can be a bit daunting too, because you look at Live Ship Traders and you're like
they're all
700
huge.
pages, 800 pages, but I'll tell you what, uh, I did not feel like I was reading 800-page books when I was reading this series.
They're pretty chonky.
They
Yeah.
are huge. Yeah.
Yeah,
This
they're
one's,
chunky, but they don't read chunky. They're
I mean, that's
very, very
906 pages.
yeah.
So
So I'll be honest, I think what I'm probably gonna do is people are gonna you could judge me. You all could judge me. It's fine. Uh, all the viewers. But I will probably read it on Kindle and then also have a paperback to flip through. And the reason
that's fine.
why
They're big
this is
and they're
this is
heavy.
actually what I've been doing. This is actually what I've been doing with Janny Wirtz's series, The Wars of Light and Shadow. I have these beautiful, wonderful hardback editions, and I've also been reading them on Kindle
Yeah,
because I don't I find it's a psychological thing for me. If it's a big book in front of me, I do get intimidated. I know that sounds
yeah.
silly. There's no
No, I get it.
basis for this. There's no basis. There's no logical, reasonable, rational reason why the length or size of a book should mean anything if you're going to read anyway.
Yeah,
But at the same time, if I'm not thinking about how many books I'm reading or how long a book is, if I'm just reading on Kindle, I don't have to think about it. I just don't think about
Mm.
number of pages left. I don't think about any of that. I'm just really literally focused on, well, not literally because it's a screen, but the page in front of me. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I'm really focused on just the words on the page. And
yeah,
the nice thing about the
absolutely.
Kindle is you can erase even the percentage of how far you are in the book or how many minutes you have left in a chapter. You could erase all that data on the bottom and you could just be with the words on the screen. I did that with my A Song of Ice and Fire reread, and maybe that's
Yeah.
why I didn't really think about it. Like, I just don't
No.
like thinking about the length of a book. I want to just be in the story. So if that's the point, then that's probably what I'm going to do. But I do love having the physical books because I love to be able to like go back and tab certain pages
Yeah.
or, just have the reference. So I'm kind of weird that
That's a
way.
strange thing you say, actually. I mean, I do that too with Kindle. I didn't realize how long some books are until after I'd read them. And then I see them in the store and I'm like, holy moly, that's a big book. Didn't
Right.
feel like that when I read it on my Kindle. But I find when I'm looking for a quote, even though Kindle has a search function, I find it easier to find
Oh, wow.
in my physical one because I have an idea where it is in the story. So I can sort of open a book and go, no, it's before that. Open that. Okay, it's after that. And kind of go, okay, here it is. Where I could, if I really wanted to, use the search function on my Kindle, but it never occurs to me to do that.
Yeah.
It doesn't me either, Derry. Like,
Yeah.
I used my search feature like in the book. I'll use it to search for books in my library, but
Yep.
I searched within the book for the first time with Ship of Destiny because after we finished our buddy read, she's like telling me about these things about this character that I didn't know, and she's like, "Yeah, go search
Look at
this
that.
word or something and see if you can pull it up." I'm like, "Oh, now I see it. Okay, yeah."
Oh, I do. Actually, I do use the search feature all the time in the Kindle, especially if it's a name. And I'm like, has this person come up before? Which I
Yeah.
kind of
And
wish
it's
I had, honestly,
great.
for Lord of Light, because there were some names that came up at the end that I didn't realize were, I don't know, that I had question marks about. I'm like, wait, I think this came up before, but I'm not sure. And so having the Kindle function of the search feature, it's so wonderful for that.
Yeah.
but no, and the only reason I would think that anyone would judge me is because it's expensive. If I buy both the physical book
Oh, God, yeah.
and the ebook, though, you know,
It
I could
I
is
always
say
get.
that and I
expensive.
I guess
nod.
sometimes use the library. I use the library for my A Song of Ice and Fire reread.
Good stuff. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't have
you're
very
right.
many
It does
physical
get
books.
expensive, and
Yeah.
If
Because
you don't have
it's
the
too
library
much.
access, yeah.
Yeah.
Luckily, the library, like I said, it had all the A Song of Ice and Fire ones, so I was able
Nice.
to just use that. And some Kindle ebooks, yeah, it just depends. But sometimes
Yeah.
it can get expensive for sure.
They can. What I find quite good though is if you do own the ebook on Kindle, if you have gone through Amazon, you quite often can get the Audible for a massively discounted price if you
yeah,
already own the ebook, which is wonderful. And I'm shocking. I can stop myself spending money on books quite easily because I don't have a lot of money. So and I don't have a very large physical collection, but I've got hundreds of Kindle books, and I've got, I don't know, a couple of hundred audio books now. The kind of scary thing is I don't have that control if it's a book I already love. I have got so many copies of Robin Hood. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. I've
But
got all of these beautiful books. I've got all of the ebooks. I've got all of the audio books. I have the comics. And it's like they're all telling me the same story, but I have to have all of those versions because they all will give me something different. And
oh,
it's, and I've got that with Discworld. I've got that with, who's the other one? The Empire trilogy that I'm reading with Alan. And it's like several series I've got multiple copies of
yeah.
because I
yeah.
just want as much as I can from it.
I
Thank
have that.
you.
It's so funny. I have that with Dune. I have like 3 editions of Dune on my shelf. I really quickly want to just say, even though he's probably gone now, thank you so much, AP, for dropping by. It was wonderful to have you in the
Absolutely.
chat. But yeah, as far as like Dune, it's kind of funny because I reread that book early on in my channel, and I reread it through an ebook that my husband owned, actually, my husband's ebook. And the first time I read it with the library edition. But when I read it the first time, I even had the thought, I think this is the best book I've ever read, or my favorite book that I've ever read, possibly. I wasn't sure, but I was thinking it might be. And I felt the same way upon reread, but I didn't own a physical book. And then the funny thing is, because I kept saying that, I ended up receiving 3 physical editions as
Oh,
gifts.
that's marvelous.
Like that Christmas. So I received one from Sarah Reads, and then my
That's
husband got me the
wonderful.
Waterstones edition, and then my sister bought me an edition. So I have like 3
That's
beautiful
wonderful.
editions on my shelf now. And now I'm joking to myself, well, that means I just need to reread it 3 more times.
Absolutely.
So,
Because that's what they're for. You should read them.
just to
Yeah.
reread them. Yeah. And that's what I was going to say to you, Derri, is, I mean, you're going to reread every single one of those books. So you're going to put them to
Absolutely.
good use.
Oh, absolutely. And talk about AP, who has sadly left us already. He was talking to Tori last week, I think,
Night
about
or
the
2 nights ago. Yeah.
cost,
Anyway.
the I can't think of the word now, but the cost efficiency of books, because you buy it and then you read it and there you go. That's how much money you spent on that book, but you own it. So you're going to reread it. So that value just got stretched a bit further. And if you reread it again, that gets stretched a bit further again. And if you lend it to someone, then that gets stretched even further. And that one investment of what can feel sometimes like a bit too much money for a lump of paper, that pays for itself just over and over and over again, because it does, and it can change between rereads. So that same dollar value is giving you multiple versions of the story as you evolve as a reader, which changes the story that you're reading. Value for money out the wazoo. So yeah.
By the way, I have a little special surprise, and that is an Evie. I wanted to bring an Evie in to say hi.
Hey, Evie!
Listen, Alan is not the only one that can crush you on his streams.
It's true. So I'm letting. I told Evie that she was welcome to crash, because I know that you two have such a special friendship. You and Derri and Evie have such a special friendship, and yeah, Evie and I are part of the same team. So I wanted to invite her in.
Awesome.
So good to see you, Evie.
There's a lot of Evie love here too.
Oh, Matt,
there should be.
Series.
Matt, by the way, bad news, Matt. Sorry to break it to you live here, but I have to go to my mother-in-law's tomorrow, so I might be late for the live ship creators discussion. So.
Oh no.
That's all right.
Oops.
That's okay.
Sorry
I'm sure we can gush enough while we're waiting for you.
But yeah, this is a chance for me to ask you all about rereading. Bookish Chaz, I think I'll ask you first. Do you reread books, or do you regularly reread books?
I do reread books, but not super regular. There are some that I've reread multiple times. Dune, for one, I've reread. That's my absolute favorite sci-fi book of all time. Although Hyperion is a close second. So
Hyperion is very much akin to Dune. Have you read the entire Dune Chronicles though?
I have not. I read Dune Messiah, but I haven't read the others. I'm planning to do that next year, and I haven't read Endymion yet, so I'm planning to read those next year as well. So, but yeah, I absolutely love Dune. I just can't get enough of Dune, and so I need to read the rest of the saga. And of course, I've reread Ocean at the End of the Lane multiple times. That's my favorite book of all time. And I reread Neverwhere. Neil Gaiman is very rereadable for me. Good Omens, I've reread. The Night Circus and the Starless Sea. Love those books. I have reread the Night Circus. I haven't done a reread for Starless Sea yet, but I will. So I'm selective with my rereads because I have so many other books I want to read, but I do. That's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, I loved your answer. As far as the Dune books, that's definitely, I've only reread the first Dune book, but I would love to reread those. I have read as far as Children of Dune. I have not read God Emperor though. And I will read that at some point, especially when I keep saying, when I want more wormy weirdness, I'll read that book, because that is some wormy weirdness there on the cover. Oh yes, Children of Dune is excellent.
I love these new covers. Oh my goodness!
I need to get it. Yeah, I need to get my copy of that. But I will say that the reason when I was saying earlier that I had the thought that Dune was my favorite book when I read it the first time, the one thing that held me back from feeling like it was maybe going to be a favorite was because the ending made me feel a little unresolved. Now, I know that the book was intentionally going to be written as a standalone, and later on, Herbert added those other books in the series. But for me personally, this is just me personally, I felt like Children of Dune and Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, for me, just created an arc of that story that made
Right.
me feel very satisfied. So I was
That's
so
what I
happy
feel.
with all three of those books. And even though Dune, the first book, is still my favorite, I felt like both Dune Messiah and Children of Dune I loved those books. And they also made me love the whole of those three books even more. It made me love the first book even more. So I think they're all worth reading personally, even though I do need to read that fourth one.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely am excited to finish out the 6-book saga. I don't really know if I'm going to continue on and read the expanded universe by Brian Herbert. I don't know. We'll see. I might, but it's not high on
It's
my
good.
priority.
Oh god. Sorry, I just got a little sick there.
Oh, no.
Brian Herbert, it just brings it out of me.
Oh, but
I've heard it from many people. I was told
Yeah.
not to read past the first Dune book many years ago because they just all go downhill
Listen,
from
that was
there.
a former boyfriend, and that's former for a reason.
Yeah.
You got it. You remember details very well. Yes.
Yeah, you've
I don't know
upgraded
why
since
I
then.
hyperfixated on that. That's the thing that stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
Evie knows
Oh.
my love life history.
A
It's so
lot of
funny.
people
That's
don't
right.
like Dune Messiah, and I love Dune
I
Messiah.
love Dune
Like,
Messiah. It's really
almost,
good. It's
I
amazing.
loved it almost as much as I love Dune. It's just
Dune Messiah, again, I'm gonna get on my soapbox. Dune Messiah does not get the credit and the love that it deserves. It's
Yes.
always looked as a bridge book,
It
as
is.
an addition to Dune, or a prequel to Children of Dune. And like, I get it, but at the same time, it is such a good book on its own. Like, it's basically a murder mystery, and I hate murder mysteries, but it made me love it. And
Yeah.
it's so good. And I argue it's all about the women around Paul Atreides. It is not about Paul Atreides at all. And
Yeah.
if you hate Dune Messiah, you hate women.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
What a
bold
bold
words.
statement.
No, just
I'm-
kidding. I'm being hyperbolic.
Dang. Yeah, no, I think it's because Brian Herbert in the forward said that Dune Messiah is a bridge book or was considered a bridge book, or that was how Frank possibly conceived it originally. But I understand. I understand your case. I always recommend people watch, well, not only our wonderful discussion on Evie's channel. I was in a wonderful discussion with Evie and with Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads and with Pete from Ponderings with Pete on Dune Messiah. So everybody could check that out if you want spoiler thoughts. But Michael K. Vaughan did a fantastic video on Dune Messiah too. And he actually makes the argument that he thinks Dune Messiah, in some ways, in his opinion, makes Dune a better book. And he explains why he thinks that. So I highly recommend that video as well. Just want to shout that out.
I think a lot of people go into Dune Messiah expecting an immediate sequel, and it's not. It takes place so many years into Paul Atreides' reign, and he's a different person. The people around him are different. The universe. He's traversed, and I don't know that I want to say conquered, but he's ruling over vast parts of the universe at this point in time. So everything is completely different, and that turns a lot of people off.
We just have to be careful about spoilers. Sorry. As I was reading the last comment, I'm like, I hope I'm not spoiling anything for the series.
So I would actually, having read the Dandelion Dynasty this year, which it was not on my bingo card, let alone starting it, let alone reading the entire series this year. But that's an aside. I actually think the Dune series is really, or I should say, the Dandelion Dynasty is a really good representation of the structure of the Dune Chronicles, where I think, the more that I think about it, Dune, as the first book, is basically a setup book for the rest of the series. It really starts with Dune Messiah.
That's what
Mhm.
it feels like, even though it's so strange to hear that Dune was originally conceived as a standalone. So I find that really interesting.
Well, I
But
mean,
I'm
Grace of Kings, like, you can read that as a standalone and it feels like it's satisfactory as an arc, in
Mhm.
my opinion. But
yeah, interesting.
Well,
I
you'd be
Sorry, I was
shooting
trying to
yourself.
digress a little bit.
Continue.
Let's go back to rereading before we give away spoilers. But we could definitely continue this sometime if anybody wants to have a
Fair
separate Dune
enough.
discussion, because I do
That'd
want
be
to read
awesome.
the fourth book.
I
Go ahead.
still, 3 years later, I still need to reread Children of Dune so we can do our Children of Dune discussion.
Yes,
So.
I'll have to reread it at this point, but I love that book. Loved it.
But
So
Maybe
speaking of
if I read it soon, I can join in the discussion.
there you go.
okay, but
Although,
sorry,
go ahead. I
oh,
was just gonna say,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I'm bringing up this whole reread discussion because I have a few thoughts on it, and one is that I personally have decided, at least for, I don't know, a short while, I need to stop rereading books because I have reread so many books this year, and I did not intend it. I intended the A Song of
But
Ice and
did you
Fire
get
reread.
more out of them this time?
Yes, I did.
That's why I
Yeah,
reread.
I did. I really did. I loved
Mm.
my reread experiences. I don't regret any of my reread experiences. However, it's gotten to the point where I feel like I need to read some books. I need to read The Dandelion Dynasty. I need to read some of these other series. I need to read Live Ship Traders. I haven't
Well,
been
yeah.
able to carve out that time because I keep rereading things, and I love rereading. But I have some other questions too, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Derri and Evie, because Evie, I know you've also been rereading a lot this year and finding time to read other stuff too. So, Derri, tell us about the reread. Why you're? I mean, I know that you explained
Well,
earlier in this
yeah,
discussion that it's been an important part of your journey as you had
yeah.
the stroke. But any other thoughts you want to add to that?
Part of it is I mean, and BookTube for a little while there sort of pulled me away from rereading quite so much into reading more new things once I got the hang of that. Once I was able to do that. And while the joy of new things is wonderful, it did very much point out to me that I'm still looking for the same kind of feelings from new reads as I get from my most beloved books. And I've said this to other people as well, in that constantly rereading, because it is pretty much constant, of Hob, it keeps that standard of what is good really high, because you never go so far away from something that is such good quality that you forget what that bar is, where you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty good, and the next book perhaps isn't quite as good, but you're like, yeah, that's pretty good, and pretty good becomes comparatively not that great. That when you come back to something that is exceptional, it kind of astonishes you. It's like, wow, okay, I got those McDonald's meals of books, they became very easy. It's nice occasionally to come back to that banquet and kind of go, this is that satisfied feeling. This is what it is to be sated and to have what I wanted from these books. And as I said earlier, talking to other people about them has really helped as well, in terms of the gift of a new lens to look at the series through, or to look at a character through. That when you read it, it changes what the book is, and it changes what the story offers you. And I've changed over the years.
Mhm.
When I first started reading Hob, I was much younger. I was still in my 20s. I was a very different person. And so reading that series could only offer me what I could take in in my 20s, and what was available to my brain to go, yes, I understand that. I can relate to this. I can make all of those connections in my brain. The older I've got, I can see from that person's character's point of view, and from that character's point of view, and how that shifts what the story looks like. And so it's that value in the book. I'm still reading a new story every time because it's giving me more. And if and I get a bit pedantic on it, if a book can't do that, then is it as good value?
That's
Unless you
really
bought
well
it as a
said.
McDonald's meal, then
It-
okay, fine. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's beautifully
if it
said.
can do that.
It makes me
McDonald's.
think. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna make a joke that McDonald's did get rid of their value menus, so
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So I was just going to say that it reminds me so much of what the video that AP did a few years ago, A Critical Dragon. He did a video on story worlds, and I think it's a real gift. So a story world is not, and I'm going to paraphrase here, of course, watch the video for a more accurate description. But an author can only, a good author is really skilled at writing a world in which they're giving you certain details, they're fleshing certain things out, but they're also leaving it to the reader to build the world, to make inferences, to construct from there. They're not giving you every single little tiny thing the way that a show can, the way the adaptation can, for example, fill in those gaps. And so we construct our own story worlds when we're reading something. Like when I was reading Dune the first time, it was just, it was so insanely massive. I mean, just how big and vast everything felt and how tiny everything felt on Arrakis at the same time, and big, the worms, like everything, just scale just kept coming up in my mind. And I was going back and forth with the scale of things and the scale of what was happening in the story. But when you read it when you're older, there are other kinds of things that obviously get fleshed out or that you think about or that you understand in a different way, and the story world kind of changes a little bit, and maybe the world looks a little bit different, or the way you understand space looks a little different, maybe because of things that we've discovered over time, which even Frank Herbert maybe didn't even know about. So the
yeah.
story world might change over time, just using Dune as an example since we were just talking about it. But I think it's a skilled author who can, again, give you enough detail that each of us is probably constructing a very similar story world, and at the same time adding to it with our own imaginations. And upon reread, like you said, it's almost like a new story because you're a different person. So the way that you're constructing that might be a little bit different. Your brain is a little bit different by the time you reread it. So I think that's something really special to appreciate. It just came up in my thoughts as you were talking about that.
You've experienced more things since the last time you read it. So perhaps the story was about losing somebody close to you, and you haven't had that yet. And so you read it and you're like, oh, that's really sad. But then you lose somebody close to you and you read it and you're like, wow, okay, that's a whole different thing now because it speaks to me on that level. And okay, that's a dramatic example, but you might go through a relationship breakup, or you might have a child, or you might move because of a job, or you might move for a relationship, or you might get caught in a natural disaster and have to rebuild your life from scratch. All of those things are possibilities in anybody's life. But when they occur after you've read something and then you read it again, you are bringing so much more of yourself and so many more lenses in your own experience that is going to change the way you see the characters, the way you see the situation, the believability of certain scenes. And so rereading is usually a very positive experience. Occasionally, very occasionally, it can be a negative one, because at that point you go, actually, that author had no idea what they were talking about. And that was a load of rubbish.
Dragonlance Chronicles.
Oh no. Yes, that's right.
So sometimes rereading isn't great
Oh
because
no.
you've evolved and you've gone, I know what I'm looking at now. And but again, that does it hold up to rereads? And I really appreciate a book that does.
Mm-hmm.
It's so fascinating. So, Evie, you've been rereading a lot this year. What are your thoughts on that? I know that Dragonlance, obviously, that did not work for you as much as it, in your reading journey now as it did when you were a teenager. But overall,
For my thoughts, see all of your thoughts. No, I'm just kidding. But also not kidding at the same time. To actually bring it back to Dune, because I guess Dune is the mini theme of my contribution to this discussion. I first read Dune, the first 6 books in high school when I was 15. And I didn't reread Dune until 2019. So 20 years later, 21 years later. Oh my God. And obviously, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 15. And I think so. What everyone has been saying about, you change as a reader, you grow, you have context. So the way that I tend to like to read is I debatably like to read more academically. I like to understand contextualization of the author, but also, again, you have your own personal context. Like if I have no experience with something, I'm not going to be able to pick up on something that's in the text that somebody else would that had that experience or has that background in. It's really just the kind of 50-50 is the perfect balance of a book. 50% of the author providing the story, providing the world, and 50% of that reader experience. Now, everything can be like, some authors can go like 60, 70% and, only require minimal effort from the reader. And some books work like that. But it can also be a bad thing, like, as a hot take here, like the Poppy War. R.F. Kuang is very direct and not nuanced about what she is writing and her storytelling. So there's not a lot of room of kind of nuanced contextualization.
Yep.
Reader, like bringing the reader in and like having them infer stuff. And some people like that, some people don't. I don't really know, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. That doesn't answer the question about rereading, though. Sorry, rereading. I love to reread. I've reread so often. Actually, until BookTube, I really didn't read anything new because I was rereading so much. I reread Persuasion every year. Reread it every year since I first read it when I was 15. Again, same year that I read Dune. I reread now the Winter Night trilogy ever since I started. Since I read it after starting BookTube. I'm going to be rereading Don Quixote next year because it's that type of book for me. I reread The Spear Cuts Through Water every year, The Vanished Birds every year. And it's just, there's something so wonderful about rereading a book that you know. It's a level of comfort in a way, regardless of what content is on the page, whether it's dark or happy or whatever. There's just some feeling of being familiar and content with the story, and you can either get more out of it if you want on a reread, or you can just be like, I just want to read the surface level because I just want to feel happy with the story again, or I want to feel that contentment with the story. And it's your choice as a reader to take even more out of it the next time, or take that same experience and just kind of relish in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah, totally agree.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Yeah, I just
Persuasion is your favorite Jane novel?
I had a visual as you were saying that, Evie, and I was thinking about imagine you're traveling somewhere and you've never been there before. You take the most direct route. You get on the highway and you know which exit you need, and you take that road, then you're there. However long that journey is, there's a lot of space between points A and B, and you're just taking the direct line. Your reread is not using the highway. You know how to get there.
Analogy.
You know that you're going to explore on your way there, and you can go and have a look at this thing that's over here, and we'll check out this thing that's over here. I know I'm going over there eventually, but I don't have to rush there. I know how to get there, so I can explore what's actually on the page. And a lot of, Chaz, you will get there. Evie, you get to the end of Realm of the Elderlings, you found your destination. Now you're like, oh my God, I missed so much stuff on the way. I have to do it again. Because you've realized how many things you didn't think to look for on your way the first time. So the second time through, you go through and you're like, oh my God, did you notice this thing that's just here? It was right there.
Oh,
but you were so focused on getting where you were going that you weren't able to see it. So even one reread of any book will show you the scenery. It will give you the breadth of the world far better than that first read. And I just, if you loved a book first time round, read it again. You will just
wow.
get so much from it.
That was
You really
beautiful. That
will.
was a beautiful analogy. I loved it.
That was.
Thank
And
you.
it also speaks well to this. I feel like I read so slowly. I don't know how to juggle a reread with all the new series I want to get to. I do need to make time to reread The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings soon, which is definitely worth rereading. I think I want to carve out time to reread those as well. Um,
I've
but I
never
would
read
say
them.
that there is something about what you were saying, Derry, about it's less about getting to the end point and the end
Yeah,
destination. So in a way, reading slowly on a reread can be a beautiful
it's
thing
so
too.
good.
Could help you
It
to
Mhm.
absorb
really
it more.
is.
But it is this is the thing is, yeah, we do live in a day and age where we have so many options, so many things to read, and it could be hard to
Oh, and we're
juggle that.
blessed at the
We are
moment.
blessed.
There's
Yes.
so many amazing authors. We've got independent publishing now is really booming, and there are some amazing stories coming out of all the indie press stuff that the big publishers just don't have space for,
Mm.
basically. And but we get them now. We're not just getting that handful of new things every year. We're getting
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
And so that it's almost overwhelming. You're like, oh, there's so many. How do I find the one that's going to work for me? It's scary and overwhelming. But how blessed are we that we're overwhelmed with choice instead of there's only this, so I'll read that.
Uh,
Yeah.
to play devil's advocate, because there's so much, that is enough of more than enough reason for you to reread, because you know that this story is going to work for you.
Yeah.
Reread it, dadgummit.
It's kind of
And
funny
it's like
because
everybody, find the balance. What works for you?
yeah, it's kind of funny because I've found that some of my reasons for rereading, because it wasn't a conscious decision, aside from A Song of Ice and Fire, a lot of my rereads this year weren't a conscious decision. Some of it was an experiment as to see if my reading taste has changed. And actually, I
Ooh,
would say that
what
it
did
was
you
the case with
find?
The Song of Ice and Fire too. And part
Mm.
of it related to that, to see if my reading taste has changed, is also to wonder if I could trust myself, to trust myself as far as what I feel. Like, for example, with The Song of Ice and Fire, I read those books the first time back in 2011, I think, around that time. And I need to look up the exact date because I'm always fuzzy on that now. But I loved those five books so much. I cannot express how much they did for me as a reader, what how much they mean to me as a reader. But as much as I loved those books, as high as I was on those books, they were also novel to me in many ways. No pun intended, but with the word novel. But you know what I mean? They were still different than anything I'd
Yeah,
experienced before. And so it made me question myself all these years later, over a decade later. Well, was it
were
just that
they
I
a
hadn't
work?
read much at the time? Were they really that amazing? Like, am I just imagining they were as good as they were? Would I look at them more critically now because I've read more and I understand more about blah blah blah? They held up
Yeah,
100%, like 110%. Those books have held up for me.
and
In
some to
fact,
some degree get better.
in some ways, yeah. It's
Yeah.
kind of weird for me though with rereads because I actually even reread a book this year that I loved when I was 10 years old, which was like a YA book, which you would never think I would love. And I loved it
What is
on
it?
reread. Loved it.
What is
The
it?
It's a book by an author. Nobody's gonna know who this is probably, but it's an author named Lois Duncan. And the book is called Stranger with My Face. And it's a paranormal YA book about a young girl who lives on an island off of Maine. And she just moved there with her, I don't know, she just moved there with her family. I'm trying to remember the details now. She's 17 years old and she gets a new boyfriend. She rides the ferry to school every day. And then her friends and the popular kids who embraced her, it has those tropes, basically say, "Hey, there was a girl at a like she gets sick one night, isn't able to go to this popular kid party, and the next day everybody's angry at her because they say you were at that party and you were making out with another guy. What the heck?" what's wrong with you? And she says, oh, I wasn't out. I was sick. I was at home. What are you talking about? And so she finds out there's a double, and she's trying to figure out who this other person, this stranger with her face is. And I'm not going to say it's the most unusual book ever, but I loved what this author did with the story. I still love that book to this day. And I love the way it ended too. I was kind of blown away how much I loved it on a reread, because I loved the heck out of it when I was a teenager, or when I was a tween. And I reread it, I think, a decade or two ago, and I still loved it. So I've read it twice now, reread it twice, and it held up for me. So I don't know what the deal is. I feel like, here's the thing too. So this is what I was going to add to that. I loved the book on reread. And of course, I saw it differently upon reread than I did the first time. I was able to pinpoint more exact things I loved versus the first time when I read it. But at the same time, as I can find new details, like for example, in A Song of Ice and Fire, I found so many new details of what I loved upon reread. But at the same time, I don't know, this is going to sound weird, but I don't know if I've ever loved a book more upon reread than I loved it the first time I read it. There might have been one or two books that was the case for, but usually if I loved the book the first time, I usually love it at least as much on reread. So it's usually about the same.
It's just a deeper.
It's just a different kind of
appreciation
love
for it.
There is something to be said for your first time reading a book.
Oh, you can never read it the first time again. Again, if you're going to read Hob, want to read it and relish it. Seriously, just let it soak in. Take as long as you want. I want to point out here, JR says he has the same feelings about the Dresden Files, because this is a series I've come to reasonably recently. This is one of my thank you, AP, for helping me read new books, because it was a series I wanted to read for so very long. And it took me a long time to build the world in my head. And when I finally did, it took sort of 4 or 5 books. By the time I hit the 6th book, I was off and running, to the point where I finished the next 11, 12 books in just under 2 weeks. I was like, no, I have to read this. This is amazing. I have to. And I've reread that series twice now. So in the space of 2 years, 3 years, I've reread that series 3 times. I've read it 3 times. And it's wonderful. That's a really good series to watch an author develop, actually, as well, because first 2 not that fabulous, but they just become great. But you're able to get a richer sense of who the character is, because you know where they're going. And so you're like, okay, that potential of what I've seen so far was always there, and I can see it now. I can see the author knew he was going there. And that's a fascinating thing to be able to do that you can't on your first read, because you don't know where it's going. And it's
I think for me, and I'm gonna poorly paraphrase Jared here, who I think was paraphrasing AP, or maybe Steve Donahue, one of the folks, that you got to read a book 3 times to really appreciate it or something. And I think the initial read on something, I don't want to agree with that, by the way, but I will say that I think the initial time, the first time you read something, oftentimes, depending upon the type of reader that you are, like for myself, I'm not really I wouldn't call myself a plot-driven reader. I'm not an action-driven reader. So when I initially read a book, I connect emotionally, not the emotions in the book, but just the feeling that I get when I read a book. And so when I reread a book, I'm reminded of that emotional connection. That's why I don't think I can love it generally. I don't think I love a book even more on reread. I just have I think basically what you said, Derri, is just a deeper appreciation for it, because I already have that emotional connection to it. And so I'm able to connect with it deeper, more than just emotions, on that kind of plot driven, the craft of it, and thematically and stuff like that.
If anybody is watching this and you find that you your enjoyment declines on reread, please feel free to share that. Even if you're watching the replay, please feel free to share that in the
Yeah.
comments.
I mean, again,
'Cause
Dragon Chronicles. So
well, that's true. Yeah.
That's all there.
And
I
here's
would
the
just be
thing is
curious to hear from people about that topic too.
That's I think one of the very few for me, what I would consider as objective as a subjective thing can be, the sign of a good author. Can you read it again and not see a whole heap of flaws? Because let's face it, when you're young, when you're inexperienced, when you haven't encountered this story before, you tend not to notice on your first read through all of the things that potentially would bother you later. When you come back, it's those things become glaringly obvious. Where you're like, this
That's
was
true.
so predictable, and that was really, that's not how somebody's going to do that, and those things stand out. But a really good author has written something structurally sound. It stands, it holds its own, and can withstand that more focused look. It can withstand your attention to point of view, to tone, to theme work, to whereas other things don't. And this is how classics become classics, because they hold up. You know, they're structurally sound. The foundation of the story is solid. The theme work's fabulous. The characters are fabulous. All of those things. Other things written at the same time may have outsold that classic, but haven't held up to rereads and haven't become the classics that they are today.
Well, and we could also
Anne of Green
note,
Gables, Little Women.
Yeah.
Those things have really hung on because they're true to people. Yes, the world has moved a long way since
that's
Little
right.
Women.
Yeah.
A very long way since Anne of Green Gables. But the loneliness of an orphan girl, still true. Still true today. That wanting a home, wanting a best friend, wanting to feel connected. Those are all still valid. Those are all still points of view that we can connect to and feel validated for. Little Women, you know, girls who are adrift in the world without their dad, who, again, they're looking for their place in the world. That's still relevant.
Yeah.
So I will, other than Dragonlance Chronicles, I was looking at my shelves and I realized I have another example of something that I reread that I disliked on reread.
What was it?
Well, I shouldn't say disliked. I did not like as much. And that is the Books of Babel.
Oh, that's too bad.
Really?
I still love Sinless Ends. I still love Arm of the Sphinx. Those two are great. And just on reread, I appreciate Josiah Bancroft's writing style, his intent, but the flaws of plot structure, and there are some kind of caricature-esque elements to characters that are really glaring on reread. I know I'm a fake fan, Anita. I'm so sorry. Yeah, and I was so bummed. I was like, oh no,
Yeah. So I was
I'll
gonna.
be right back.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me go ahead and just read some of the comments here. Since we already know the plot, I think we could focus more on what the author's trying to do on a deep level with rereads. That's true.
Yeah.
Although I have to admit, and I have to say I always say this with exceptions, because some books are, I think, more about the mission of the story, that kind of thing, or a mystery kind of narrative. There are different types of narratives. I tend to be somebody who usually, depending on what I read or the type of books I read, I don't usually focus on the plot that much. So I usually miss things anyway, and I'm usually focused on this little detail or that little detail. But that is a good point, that absolutely, once you understand the whole arc of what's happening, then you can kind of just focus on other things. That's definitely true. A much
Absolutely.
deeper love for a reread comes years later. I would say, oh, interesting. Yeah. And I have to say too, with the book,
I don't think there's a time limit on that. Like, oh, you've got to wait 8 to 10 years. Like, you're changing
If you
every
want to
day.
read it, read
So-
it.
Yeah, I've been recently rereading books that I've read in much shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
I will say though that the book that I was talking about earlier, the book I loved as a
Stranger
kid,
with My Face.
yeah, Stranger with My Face. That one, yes, there are definitely some cringy things in that book, like looking at it now. But I still forgive it, and maybe some of that's nostalgia, but I still love that book. I still think that
Knowing about flaws and liking it anyway is
yeah,
just as valid.
I
I
think
mean,
so too.
I'm not ashamed, but I'm not hugely proud, but I'm not ashamed of the fact that I really enjoy the Twilight series.
Oh yeah,
That thing is rubbish on every level you could imagine. It's shallow. There's no depth there. Let's be real. This is popcorn fiction at its finest. But I enjoy it and I reread it because sometimes that's just what I want.
I actually really liked the Twilight series, except for book 4. That was where I just was really angry at the series. But I honestly enjoyed it. I'll be honest.
So
I enjoyed
you
it.
can enjoy
and
something
part of
that's
it,
flawed.
yeah, and part of it was because I read it when I was younger, and so I was able to understand the character perspective. Because I know it's easy. I feel like it's easy as an adult to be like, "That's rubbish," but at the same
Oh, it's
time,
so much rubbish.
when you're a teenager and you're in love,
you yearn desperately to be the
like
center of
it's so
somebody's
real.
world.
It's so real to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess I can kind of validate it in a weird way. What about you, Chaz? Have you reread anything that you liked less upon reread, or you kind of just dropped off on?
That's a good question. So far, I don't think I have. Of course, I haven't reread a ton, but yeah, so far everything I've reread, I have not liked less. I've liked it at least equally as much as I did before.
Oh,
So, thankfully, um, and there are some books that I'm a little bit worried about, like if I ever reread them, like Lord of the Rings. Even though I want to reread it and I love Lord of the Rings, I kind of wonder. Someone put in the chat earlier something about loving it more for the nostalgia than actually really enjoying it again just as much. I am a little worried about that.
I've reread Lord of the Rings quite a few times, and there's a beauty to it. There's a poetry to it. There's I don't know. There's a real magic about that series that you feel it, and
yeah,
I don't know.
I agree.
I would say that it would fall off because these are why tropes become tropes, because it works.
Mm-hmm.
And Lord of the Rings, for so many of us, is the heart of these tropes. Mm-hmm. So to see them being done the best they were done, this is what we're copying. You kind of can't go wrong.
But to me, Lord of the Rings is brilliant because even though we can identify tropes in it, I don't feel like they feel like tropes to me. Like that's
beautiful.
Right. Yeah. He made them feel new and fresh.
He really did. I feel like there's something about Tolkien's writing that makes you feel like that's just so immersive and feels so real. It feels like a real place to me in a weird way.
Yeah, because it's given to you so richly. You know, it's rich. And this is why we hold it up as the example, because Aragorn is the hero that we see in so many other books. It's like, okay, well, that's the Aragorn, and that's the Boromir, and that's the we can see those characters because these were the ones that set the benchmark. You want your hero to be like Aragorn. You want your conflicted, could be a hero, could be a bad guy, to be believable. We want that person to be Boromir. You know, we want our naive orphan boy to be Frodo. We want those feelings that we got from those characters in Lord of the Rings, because that was them done perfectly.
But it is an interesting question though about nostalgia and timing though too, because I know for me, like I read those books, when I was, at least most of them. I didn't read Return of the King, but I read the other ones when I was a teenager. And so it's so hard to separate that because reading that as a teenager, it felt like so real. I was like, whoa, this is like a
Yeah.
real world. It was my first fantasy. So it felt like this is possible. It's possible to have a world that feels this vivid, this immersive, this real, but it's somehow not real. How is that
Yeah.
possible? It just boggled my brain at the time. And so there's part of me, I think, that still lives with that still has that association. But I
Yeah.
can understand at the same time for people who are just coming into fantasy that maybe if they pick it up, it doesn't quite have the same magic for them. Some people it does. Some people maybe it requires them slowing down a little bit more because
That's
fantasy is
exactly
written
what I was going to
differently
say.
now.
Yeah.
People
It's a slower
nowadays feel that
journey.
way with the Mistborn trilogy, which
Mhm.
is something that I feel for me just did not live up to quite that height, but I can understand why it does for some people as well.
Mm.
But no, that's a really interesting point though, Chaz, and I'd be really curious if you do reread Lord of the Rings to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on it.
Oh, I definitely will reread it at some point, and I'll probably do the audiobook with Andy Serkis because I've really been wanting to try that out.
Mm.
So I'll definitely reread it at some point. I will probably reread. Like I've read The Hobbit 3 times because I read it twice with my kids.
Nice.
But and I will probably reread most of Tolkien's Legendarium again, maybe with the exception of the Silmarillion. I don't think I would really enjoy that on a reread.
Okay.
I barely enjoyed it on a first read, and I know that's an unpopular opinion, but it's a really dense and complicated book to read. So
That's what I've
That is
heard.
kind of the what would you call it?
The consensus.
I was thinking more in terms of like the advanced placement part of fantasy reading. It's like you
yes,
read the Silmarillion for extra credit.
yeah,
It's, it's bonus material and isn't really sold as a solid story. It's
so true.
this is the world. Yeah.
I think, yeah,
Um,
and I think that relates back to the question of why we read,
yeah.
and especially why we read fantasy. What is its place for us? Is it is it more of a lighthearted type of thing, or is it more like I want to study this? I want to dive in deeper and
Yeah.
deeper
I
and
need
deeper,
more.
and what levels? Where are we orienting our reading? Is it more
Yeah.
something that we're wanting to think about, or just something we more want to feel? Like, is it a
Yeah.
more of an emotional thing?
So the funny thing for that I've realized about myself over the past, 5 years, since I've really started getting into fantasy, is that I find myself being able to connect, well, sci-fi fantasy. I'm finding myself being able to more easily and more deeply connect with, sci-fi fantasy characters than I am with, contemporary, like, real world characters. Um and I have not unpacked this. I'm doing this live, unpacking this live. And I don't know why that is. And I don't know if it's because they're not in a familiar world, so I'm experiencing the world along with them, or if they don't have the trappings of modernity around them, and so I am able to um kind of emotionally kind of put myself in their shoes to experience this world. I don't know what it is, but I do find myself more often than not more deeply connected to the fantastical characters than I am like real life characters.
Mhm.
Um,
I have a theory on it, and it's why I read mostly fantasy. It's very rare I branch out of it anymore. And that I find it far easier to believe a story about real people in an unreal world than I do reading about people in a real world that's unbelievable.
Mhm.
So I find fiction that's set in the real world is often premised on an unreal circumstance, something that is false. And so it's too jarring to read about a character in a situation that I just don't believe.
Mhm.
But I can believe a person who has to deal with talking ships or talking trees or being able to transport themselves across the universe. I can believe those characters because I've given my brain permission to go, okay, the circumstances are allowed because it's not real. But if they're trying to convince me that this happened in that town in that year, and I'm like, but did it really?
I don't have that problem because I can think of books that are historical fiction or that are, I guess, more modern or contemporary that I've been able to connect to just fine without having that issue. But I can understand your reasoning behind that, though. I think that's really interesting.
I just think
I'm very
the
similar
goal
to
is
Derri
different.
in that historical fiction does not usually. There have been a few that I've enjoyed, like the Warlord Chronicles by Cornwell, but on the whole, I am not. I don't do historical
And
fiction.
maybe that's why it's the character driven or plot driven.
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy tends to be, however extreme on what end you want to go, but it tends to be character driven, that the story is being driven by something the writer is trying to tell you about people. They're not trying to tell you about, this is how we bring dragons back. Dragons don't exist, but we are going to talk about generational trauma, and we are going to talk about mental health, and we are going to talk about all of these things that are real in people's lives. But the books that I have tended to read in fiction set in the real world, they're not what the aim is not to talk about the character. The aim is to go, what if you won the lottery? What if America became this wasteland? What if? And it's about that, not the people. And again, like I'm thinking, just talking about this as I'm thinking about it, and I think that is what separates fantasy from a lot of fiction.
That's
It's like,
interesting.
what is the
Yeah.
point? Why are we telling this story the way we're telling it? And I think that's why I like Stephen King's The Stand, because okay, that's about apocalypse in America, but it is so about the characters.
Yeah.
So about the characters. It's about those people and what they're going through and how they respond to this and what choices they make and how those choices impact each other. It's not so much about the apocalypse.
Okay, so let me try to get this straight. So if it's I'm trying to understand because that could be an example of somebody of a story with more realistic modern day characters and what could be a believable realistic circumstance, even though it
Except
is
it's told in a
fantastic.
fantasy way, in that we're going to have an improbable situation so that we can say, what are these people going through? What story are they trying to tell? And I think, this is why The Stand isn't classed as general fiction. It's usually classed as science fiction or horror, because that hasn't happened. It's not likely to happen. And we're asking the question, what's going to happen to people in this instance?
Huh.
We're not investigating a murder and going, well, because of this really strange and rare thing, this was enabled, and then that could happen. And this series of unlikely, impossible events has led to this. But look how clever I am as an author to put that together into a mystery that you believe.
Hmm.
That doesn't do it for me at all.
Yeah,
Because, okay.
I think for me, it's, I'm just gonna shoot myself in the foot. I don't know, like take back everything I said and I don't know, do the opposite. But so as an example, Otessa Moshfegh. So one of my favorite writers. She writes real world characters. Eileen being one of them. Love that book. And I think that the reason that I love it is, even though it's a contemporary character, I connect with that character. Whereas other people read Eileen and they're like, I hate this character. And there's nothing to, how do I say it? There's nothing to not suspend disbelief, but like, well, I guess with any type of reading experience, whether, no matter the genre, no matter who, what, when, where is involved, there has to be some sort of suspension of disbelief. And if you think if you can't suspend your disbelief to the point that matches what the author is intending, then I think that's where that disconnect is. Again, Atessa Moshfegh. Eileen, contemporary character, nothing fantastical happens, but I loved it. I was compelled by it because I connected so deeply to the character. Other people definitely don't have that experience, and I can see why they do not connect to the character and subsequently hate the book. And then on the flip side, Lavona, also by Atessa Moshfegh. It is one of my favorite books of all time. I actually want to reread it this year before the end of the year. It is a historical fiction, but it's set in a
Medieval?
fictional medieval town, and there are fantastical elements to it that there are elements like on the page of like, all right, I know this is not real, so I know to suspend
Willing
my
to, yeah.
you know, and maybe it's just about, again, that 50-50 author reader thing that I was talking about earlier, is when authors, and I'm saying this very broadly, very generally, when authors try to sell something as believable and as, oh, this is real, this actually is happening, but you don't connect with that as a reader, that can be really, really jarring. And often is. And I think that's where the kind of disconnect and hatred, that might be too strong a word.
No, I think that makes sense to me. Yeah.
It's a really interesting discussion, because I don't know that I have this issue. Even though I love fantasy and I love the unreal, weird situations that we're put in, but I don't know that I ever need fantasy in order to connect with the character, because obviously, like, Stoner was my favorite book of last year. And that's about as real modern fiction as you can get. I mean, it's kind of historical fiction-esque in a way.
But again,
just made
it's
up words.
entirely character focused. This is
about, and then another one,
and this person's struggle.
Right. It's about an English college professor, and it's a very mundane type of over, like, the plot sounds very mundane. It's anything but, in my opinion. But then another book is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which is also a historical fiction going between a contemporary timeline and this person's ancestral past. And it's a Black feminist book. I loved that book. I often recommend it to fans of Kindred, but I loved that book, and I deeply connected to Ainsley Garfield's the main character, and actually all the characters in that book. But they did feel like real people to me, and nothing real fantastical happens to them, even though it's a very unique narrative structure. And then with Stephen King's book, Pet Sematary, which I recently read, even though obviously that's very supernatural and very horror, I guess, at the same time, the beginning of the book feels like you're reading a modern story of these characters, at least in the 1980s or whatever. But the way that King described the family dynamics between the two adult characters and their domestic fight that they have about how they're going to break the news of death to their child was so believable to me. It was absolutely incredible the way King did that. And often when I think about some of my favorite fantasy as far as character is concerned, it's usually when the author is able to make believable character dynamic situations in a fantasy world that could happen in our real world. So I think that that's also something really special to me. But I don't know that the fantasy world is a requirement for that to happen, though I do appreciate when it can happen. I think that's pretty cool.
What I'm hearing is I need to read better, not fantasy fiction. And that's fine too. I just want to highlight what Paul says, because he's quoting Terry Pratchett, that humans need fantasy to be human. It's where the falling angel meets the rising ape. And he talks about the need for storytelling, the need to hold ourselves to this ephemeral thing, because Death has a monologue in one of his books where he talks about you can grind the universe down into its fundamental pieces. You will find no grain of justice. You will find no grain of hope.
Mhm.
And yet humans have made these things up. Why? We need them as humans. We need them to hold ourselves up. This concept that it's not a real thing. We made it up. But every culture across our planet has it. Every culture across our planet tells ourselves stories about achieving this state of being that has honor, that has love, that has caring. None of those things exist as a tangible thing. We just made them up.
No, that's beautifully said. It reminds me so much of what Stephen Donaldson wrote in his he wrote this. There were a couple of essays that he has written that are really good that I've read. But one is about epic fantasy and the role of fantasy in our real world. And he basically says that if you look at all the great epics, they just happen to be fantasy. They happen to
Yeah.
have magic as metaphor. And it
Yeah.
speaks to, he kind of ties that into Jungian psychology, how that's representative of our shadow aspect, how we learn to grapple with these darker issues by using magic as metaphor, by
Yeah.
using fantasy. So I really love what he and also address some of the most important questions that we have as human beings. So I think that that's a beautiful way of looking at things too. But to answer this question, Max Garfield, yes, I finished A Song for Our Bun about a week or two ago, and I
So when are you talking
loved
to
it.
Jake about it?
I know. Yeah. Well, I have a discussion that I have in the works that I'm waiting for Laura from Fantasy Awash to finish that book. She's reading it right
Awesome.
now. And Josh from Red Fairy Books, he finished it, loved it too.
Yeah.
So we're all very high on the book right now. At least Josh and I are. And I know that Jake loves the book too. So I
Yeah.
am going to be planning a discussion for that pretty soon. And that's
Fantastic.
another good, that's another good author to bring up because I would say that Guy Gabriel Kay, he hardly has any magic in his stories. In fact,
I've
the two
heard
books
that.
I've read from him by so far, The Lions of Alrasan and A Song for Our Bun, I would say that both of those books, they actually have very similar types of magic. At least in A Song for Our Bun, you have two moons. There's that, and there's a character who's psychic. And in there's maybe a little bit a tiny bit more, but aside from that, there's really not much. It's not a huge part of the story. It's more about the secondary world, but and more just about these characters and the themes he was trying to go after, and of course, tying that into history too, using history as a backdrop to write fantasy. But I
I've
connected
heard
with
that
it very deeply.
I've heard that Tagana is one of his more fantastical books.
Yeah, and I've also heard the most like divisive feelings about that particular book, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
nervous about it.
I'm
I've
hoping to
heard a
read
lot of
it this
people
year.
either are hit or miss about it. So I will read that one, but I'm really glad I've started so strong with GGK this year, reading The
That's
Lines of
great.
Alrasan and The Song for a Bone. Yeah.
I did really quickly want to respond to Matt's comment. I'm not going to compartmentalize fantasy versus general fiction. Obviously, I can only speak for myself when I say that I'm speaking very broadly in generic terms, no pun intended about general fiction. And I think, I mean, that's obviously where kind of the marketing of genre comes into play. And regardless of like fantastical elements or not, storytelling has always, like you said, Joanna and Derri, storytelling has always been a part of human existence and human experience. And fantasy in particular, I think anyone that's religious, I'm sorry if I offend you, but that's where a lot of religion stems from, is the mythology and of the fantastical. Because that's something you can't see, you can't touch, you can't feel, and we tell stories in order to make sense of our world. And regardless of whether it's fantasy or not, it's, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but I'm not crapping on your general fiction, Matt. That's what I'm trying to say. So,
Well, Persuasion is your favorite book.
yeah,
So
it's true. It's true.
I don't think you could with that in mind.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's part of my bingo card to mention Stoner at least once.
Absolutely. And that's
Yeah.
okay, Polly. I've only read The Fine Arbor Tapestry as well, and I love it.
I was actually going to say,
even though everyone hates it.
well, in response to that, so one aspect of fantasy that I've really struggled with, and it's a weird like crossover in this discussion about like fantasy versus like real world, is I have not generally, I'm not thinking of an example that I've actually read, but I have not been able to get into portal fantasy.
Are
Not
you
even
really?
Narnia?
I'm sorry?
Not even Narnia?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow. I loved Narnia when I was a kid.
I never really got into Narnia, although my third grade teacher used to read us those books. I liked it,
Yeah.
but I always zoned out every time she read them, and the rest of my classmates were just completely into them.
Yeah, Finnevar is a portal fantasy, right?
Yes.
Unless, okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm like, oh, wait,
Oh.
God. Wait, am I thinking of something else? But,
No, it is. I just find it very rich. There's a lot. It's one of those things when you reread, you forgive things. You're like, okay, that's a thing. We're just going to, we won't think about that bit. We'll just keep going because it's good.
I think that's maybe potentially where my like disconnect is you're starting in the real world where it is our world, and then I have to suddenly suspend my disbelief in this moment of this portal and then go to this other world, and my brain just is like, what?
Yeah. Actually, Alice in Wonderland.
The Never-Ending Story is my favorite portal fantasy, probably. Yeah.
I still need to read it. Oh, by the way, did I...
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, Falco.
Oh,
That's so
Chaz,
cute.
you've got to. I know I always get after you, Chaz, but I really think you would love The Never-Ending Story.
I do need to try
Absolutely,
it.
you would.
Yeah, I do need to try it and give it a shot because I love the movie. I have so much nostalgia around the movie from watching
will
it
enjoy it.
since I was a kid, and so I do need to read it at some point. And
I just don't want to be re-traumatized by Artax.
Nobody wants that, but
what's
it's
that?
necessary.
No, I was just saying I don't want to be re-traumatized by Artax.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know.
That's
Yeah,
so traumatizing. Yeah.
I've heard
That traumatized every child ever who's watched that film.
I really do, though. I could be wrong, but I do feel like with you, Chaz, I feel like you have a strong. It's neat to watch your channel, Chaz, because I feel like you have a strong taste, like a strong sense of taste for what
definitely a
you
flavor.
like. Like there's a
Yeah.
flavor of what Chaz will like. When
Yeah.
you loved The Starless Sea, when you loved the Winter Night Trilogy, Strange the Dreamer, all of these types of books, and then of course all the Gaiman books and Ocean at the End of the Lane.
And the Night Circus. There's a magic to
There
what you
is.
like
There is
to
something
read.
that works about all those books, the whimsy, the wonder, and the beautiful
Yes.
prose. It
I
all
love
just
You
stuff
will
like
like.
that.
yeah, that all just speaks Chaz to me.
And
Well-
you will like The Never-Ending Story. It has all of those elements.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
that's
what I
good because I do want to read it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear your thoughts if you do. I would love to hear your thoughts. And y'all, I know I've kept you for over 2 hours. I'm going to go ahead and bring this to a close. As much fun as I've been having, I just enjoyed
Good.
talking with you all so much. And
It's been amazing.
if you're not subscribed to these 3 amazing channels, please do so. Actually, Chaz, you want to talk a little bit about your channel just for anybody who's listening?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So of course, my channel is Bookish Chaz. I read mostly fantasy, some sci-fi as well, and mystery with the occasional nonfiction. I don't do a whole lot of nonfiction, but occasionally I throw some of that in there too. But yeah, mystery, thrillers, fantasy is the majority of what I do, and I do a mix of book reviews and topics, and I do tags. I love tags, and so yeah. I try to keep it light and fun, and I've been privileged enough to never have really a negative comment on any of my videos, or somebody like arguing with me, or I haven't experienced the negativity of YouTube yet, so that's been good. But yeah, I just love books, and if you love Neil Gaiman, you'll never tire of hearing me talk about Neil Gaiman, and so yeah.
I always associate Neil Gaiman with you because I know how much you love his books.
One of these days, I hope to get him on my channel. I would love to do an interview. So, putting that out there to the universe. In fact, I did email his publicist last year with a request to have him on. I figure if I never try, the answer is always going to be no. So, maybe one of these days.
Try again. Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
So we'll expect that interview someday on your channel, Chaz.
Oh, be there in heartbeat to watch that. Goodness me. Oh.
Derri, do you want to share a little bit about your channel before we close?
Sure. My channel is not your average booktube channel. I don't do book hauls or tags or TBRs or anything like that.
You do book hauls.
Well, I did do one book haul and I did cry a lot. So please do watch that. It was lovely. I have become more in favour of longer form discussions about the books that I love. And I've been on Evie's channel to talk about books that we love. And I've spoken with Chaz about Discworld. And, we've had some great conversations about these books that I love because I've read them so many times. And I love to talk about them. And, that's pretty much why I have a channel.
That's all you really need to have a booktube channel is just have a channel and talk about books.
And opinions.
That's all. Yeah. And Evie, how about you?
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me crash your party. My channel is Choose Only Evie. I really the only regular content I post is every 6 months I do a tier ranking video of the past 6 months of reading. So if you want to wait 6 months for a tier ranking video, I will be keeping tier ranking videos alive through that. But otherwise, basically like Derri, I like the long form discussions. I do reading sprints every so often, mostly on Discord. And I just love talking about Simon Jimenez and getting people to read him, and then subsequently going to get feel like Alan of being like, now Simon Jimenez is popular. I like him first. So I'm just waiting for that day to happen.
Yeah. And if anybody ever wants to get in touch with Evie, she's also very present on Discord as well as on Alan's sprints now and then. Yeah. So you can find her there as well.
I'm mostly popular. Mostly popular. Oh my god! I really think
you are popular.
I'm most active on Instagram. I post all my reviews.
That's true. Yes, she does have a very active Instagram account as well. So thank you everybody for sharing your Saturday afternoon on Why Read, episode 22, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye.